When did you watch someone's sanity slowly deteriorate? My grandmother was brilliant and so dedicated to educating herself. She had a library of probably 1,000 books, but regularly circulated and bought new ones and sold ones she didn't need anymore. She read the paper every day, and when a topic interested her, she would cut out the article and summarize what caught her attention. Then she would file it in one of her enormous filing cabinets with other articles about it, and make notes of how the new article related to what was already there. She lived in a college town for decades and was friends with many of the professors. They would often come to discuss things of interest to her or them, including music, art and history professors. Every month she would create a mini museum exhibition on her dining room table. Wood carvings from around the world or different things made from lead with little catalog cards for every item. I have a 3-page discussion she researched and wrote about the proper times to use. Baptized and baptized. The first sign was that we were watching a documentary about Apollo 13 and she didn't remember it happening. She didn't know that it happened at all. There is zero chance that she didn't follow it as it was happening in her life. Not only was she well informed, but had a collection of Life magazines about the space program, and zero chance that she didn't hear about it afterward. She just didn't remember it at all. A little later, she was trying to play with Lego Duplo blocks with my daughter and couldn't figure out how they worked. She tried putting the same colors together, the same sizes, sliding the smooth sides against each other, putting the pegs against each other. She was so methodical in her trial and error and just couldn't get it. In her later years, she just sat in bed, measuring her sheets with her arms, trying to decide if there was enough fabric to make a dress or an apron. At the end she remembered that reading was a good thing, even though she couldn't and didn't have the attention to listen. And she hated my dad, her son-in-law. She never forgot that. Forgot my mom, but not how much she hated my dad. Jesus. This one is scary to me cause even if someone takes care of themselves mentally they can still bite the big one later on for no reason. Sorry you had to see such a thing. I worked in a care facility for people who suffer from dementia. This was a very rewarding and enjoyable job, but at times it could be confronting and sad, as you'd expect. One story that stuck with me was this lady who'd write in her booklet and always left it open. She didn't care to keep it a secret or anything, but I would make sure to keep personal possessions private as much as I could while cleaning the rooms. So I'd close the little book and put it in her desk where she could find it. It's something I could relate to. I have my own little books and enjoy writing as well, and appreciate it when people respect my privacy. I wouldn't read the contents, but I saw the phrases go from sentences to repeated words to scribbles. Eventually, she became too confused to put pen to paper, opening and closing the booklet, carefully touching the paper, but she couldn't quite figure it out anymore, eventually giving up. This really hit home to me, as I knew how therapeutic it could be to organize your thoughts on paper. I write when I'm sad or overwhelmed. The thought of her being unable to when she might have needed the outlet still stings. This hit close to home. Dad had Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. He went from writing random sentences to words to things that didn't make any sense until he forgot how to hold a pencil. It's rough. My aunt had Creutzfeldt-Jakob and your reply gave me chills. This was one of the saddest times in my life, seeing my aunt, who was like a second mother of mine, deteriorating in front of my eyes. She went from being full of life, one of the funniest and kindest people you've ever met, to not being able to feed herself in a matter of 3 months. My sister passed away earlier this year, and she was sick for a long time. During the last few months you could tell that it was becoming harder for her to think and respond. Paradoxically, it actually made her a lot nicer to me. We had never had a great relationship and I always believed she hated me, but during those last few months she said very few unkind things to me. It was hard to know that the only time we ever really got along was right before she passed away. A longtime friend of mine started talking to me about some metaphysical theories he had. We used to smoke weed and talk about philosophy when we were younger, so it wasn't a shock to me. Then he wrote a paper that was dozens of pages long on his new theory of reality. He sent it to me, and when I said it gave me a headache to try and read it, he assumed that meant I was understanding it. Every time I saw him after that, his behavior was more and more manic. I don't know if everyone gets these feelings, but one can tell when talking to some people that they're just slightly off. Anyhow, he was apparently harassing some of his old flames and acting strangely enough that his family had him taken to the hospital, where he had visited a few times in the past few weeks. The hospital held him overnight and released him because he wasn't a threat. A few days later he started acting out in his mother's house and broke a window. She called the cops and they arrested him. The window was worth more than the amount required to make it a felony and he went to jail for 6 months. 2 days inside jail and has back to normal. Why? Exclamation mark. Well, he has a degenerative disease that puts him in constant pain. He couldn't afford his pain meds, and when he went to the hospital, they refused to give him any because they assumed he was a junkie. He had prior drug issues, if you can imagine. Close bracket. He had lost his job, was living in a cold, damp apartment without electricity and couldn't get the meds he needed, so he descended over the course of a month into someone that literally thought Neil deGrasse Tyson was talking to him personally through the internet. Once he had his meds again, pain meds, not antipsychotics, he leveled out and spent 6 MOs trying to piece together what the duck had happened to him. Super nice guy, has been fine for a couple years, had to make some very elaborate apologies. It was uncomfortable to watch. Oh man, I don't think enough studies are done on the effect that constant pain has on the human brain. People talk about depression and mood swings, but there's not a whole lot of talk about how bad it can really get. I have type I bipolar disorder and my first episode was a full-blown mixed episode in high school, around age 16 to 17. What made it worse was that my family doesn't believe in psych meds. So I completely lost touch with reality over the course of a year, and it took me another year to recover enough to function without being suicidal. I wasn't diagnosed with a mental illness until college, and not bipolar I specifically until after I graduated. I'm surprised that no one thought of it sooner, given that bipolar disorder runs in my family. It started with the sleeplessness, boundless energy, and a rapid flood of ideas that initially made me look like a good student, especially at writing and literary analysis. All my language arts teachers loved me. My favorite author was Franz Kafka. Then that euphoria evolved into pure rage at the world. But on some level it felt good. I was just becoming a very hateful and pessimistic person who frequently felt like committing suicide because I couldn't stand all the suffering in the world anymore. I started seriously believing I was better than everyone else and going to win the Nobel Prize or something for my writing. The problem was that all my classmates were jealous of me and out to get me, and I could read their evil intentions in the tiniest glance and gesture. Then I went completely psychotic and panicked every day at the thought of someone drugging my food. So instead I spent as much time alone as possible so that I could self-harm and commune with God. God gave me secret information on who the evil people were and how I had to protect myself from them. So I started carrying a hunting knife everywhere, even to school, and probably could have hurt somebody if they pissed me off enough. There is a lot of advice out there about how to help people experiencing depression. Not that all of it is helpful, but there is less guidance about how to deal well with someone experiencing mania or just psychosis in general, because it can be very frightening to others, and psychotic people are not known for their rationality. Most people in my life don't know I've been through this because I look like a normal person, at least until I have another episode that gets bad enough for others to notice. I have not had any episode that extreme for a few years now, thanks to meds and therapy. I hope this is informative to people interested in the topic. Thank you for reading. Edit. I would like to get to all your comments, but it may take me a while. Thank you for your understanding. I was living elsewhere at the time, but I heard about what happened to my friend. He was fairly normal, a little exceptional actually, as he was being scouted to get sponsored for skateboarding, something he was very good at. He started acting really weird though. Things like opening his door just a bit when people came over and laughing at them, throwing chairs and such around when at people's houses, lying about things that were really obvious. reading loudly from the Bible while wearing almost nothing outside in the middle of winter. Turns out he was schizophrenic. Last time I saw him was after I moved back and was living in a bad neighborhood. He was homeless, as was his dad who was with him. He didn't even recognize me, just acted really scared that I was trying to talk to him. No one has seen or heard from him since then. I'm the last person to have seen him. That was 10 years ago. Watched my grandfather slowly sink into Alzheimer's. By the end he didn't know my name or his own. He was sad and angry and confused. I watched every week as he forgot a little more, got a little more belligerent, a little more lost, until one day I walked in and he started screaming that someone was there to rob him. It was the saddest ducking thing I've ever seen. I have such vivid memories of watching him, and my uncles have such animated debates about politics and movies and sports. They used to play Risk until the sun came up listening to Sinatra. He would sit and explain every single play in a baseball game to me as a kid. He was sharp as duck, and the saddest and hardest part was watching the struggle on his face to remember the frustration he felt, like he was letting us down. I miss him a lot. It's so hard to watch. My grandfather called all of his kids and grandkids baby because he knew us enough to know we were family, but didn't actually know who any of us were. He once overheard my grandma call me by first name and looked up at me with such clarity and said, "That's right," and recited my first and middle name. Makes me tear up every time I think of that moment. I was very close to my great grandmother. From what I knew of her, she was a wonderful lady, and I would always see her when I went to see my grandparents, as she lived in the tiny apartment that was connected to their garage. It was the highlight of my weekends. I would call her Gigi, as everyone had named like that when I was young. She was already pretty old and immobile by the time I met her, but that didn't stop us from enjoying each other's company. Well, fast forward to a time after my grandfather died and I had living with my aunt for a short time. I went and saw her as often as I could after not really being able to more than once a year for many years. She could never place my name, but for some reason always knew enough of who I was, enough to be able to remember our time together and the things we used to do. She would call me boy instead. She barely remembered anyone else from what I overheard, but I was told the first day I went and saw her she lit up and would tell people that boy came to see her today, and it put such a wide smile on her face when I would come visit. I don't know why I was the one she remembered so vividly. Compared to everyone else, I knew her the shortest amount of time, but knowing what those diseases do and how awful they are, I don't know why I was the one person who refused to truly leave her memory, but being able to brighten her dimming life up is something I cherish dearly. I've kept the nickname Boy to this day. I went away a few weeks after that first visit, and not long after I left she passed away. I always feel a twang of guilt when I think about her. I never experienced how far gone she must have been. I was able to stand on the outside of this terrible disease while the rest of my family suffered because she could barely remember them. I watched my ex-wife slowly spiral down, and I didn't even realize it. She was never really stable and had a family history of mental illness. Apparently she started cheating on me and never had the strength to tell me or get a divorce, and the constant lying and being on edge that I would find out at any minute really got to her. This was over the course of a year. Towards the end she would rock every time she sat and bit her nails till they bled. Currently she is maximumed out on a host of meds, and it takes everything she has to got to work as a janitor and come home. Her father is her guardian and helps her pay bills and stuff. She often denies past events or alters them if they were unpleasant. She is very adamant that they are real. Her father broke down and told me this a month ago and actually recommend that I not encourage our kids to visit her. I would never prevent them from seeing their mother. So in the course of her 5 years she went from a fit dental hygienist with a promising career and host of friends to an overweight janitor with no friends, who can't even pay her own rent or buy groceries. I do admire her for going to work every day and trying. You seem kind and forgiving. One day your children will be grateful for your example. My ex best friend over the course of this past year has gone from a normal, well-adjusted woman who held down a full-time job and a very nice apartment to constantly being online and talking about how humans are just slaves to an alien race that lives on Mars and how reality doesn't exist, and if she died none of it would matter because reality doesn't exist. I don't talk to her anymore because if I said anything in opposition, she would lose her shit on me. Very different from the kind, compassionate woman I was best friends with for 4 years. I miss her every day. Disclaimer, I know she's doing well. She has a great familial support system and other friends that agree with her beliefs. I just couldn't be one of them anymore. We can't force someone into help if they don't want to be helped. My wife died of cancer 3 months ago. There were serious metastases to the brain, a baseball, a pair of golf balls and some other smaller pockets of disease. My wife was an intellectual badass, held a doctorate, played concert piano, and had an uncanny ability to make correct political decisions. Badass. In the 8 to 10 weeks leading up to her death, she slowly lost her ability to speak and perform executive functions, sometimes in very interesting ways. The one I remember most was when she wanted a bowl of cereal. She had all the steps correct, but they were performed in the wrong order, so she poured the milk directly on the counter, then got a bowl, then turns the cereal box upside down, it was still closed, then got confused because she couldn't find the opening of the box, it was no longer at the top, all the while milk was dripping on the floor. Terrible and fascinating. By the end, she couldn't feed herself because she couldn't remember where her mouth was. In the last 2 weeks, all she could do was cry like a 3-year-old. I miss her terribly. My younger brother died from a drug overdose last month. He used for the first time in March. In 7 short months I watched my best friend become someone I didn't recognize. Someone I couldn't even hold a conversation with anymore. It wasn't a slow deterioration. It was a meteoric descent into a drug-fueled madness. He lied about anything and everything. Even things that made zero sense to lie about. Used nicknames from our childhood that we hadn't used in years. Would forget what we were talking about mid-conversation. It was like he was replaced with a near identical, but slightly off version of my brother. It wasn't still as heartbreaking. I mourn him, but at the end I didn't know him anymore. Edit. So first and foremost I want to thank everyone for the kind words. It means a lot. This is the hardest time of my life and I know what loss is. To answer some questions, he was using fentanyl, not heroin or meth. We did not understand the severity of it until it was too late. In a lucid moment he told me he knew he was addicted by the 3rd time he used. He came from a loving home, but we lost our father in our teenage years and I believe he never dealt with it. It hung over him. Edit 2. Seriously, I wasn't expecting this response. I'm overwhelmed by the kindness. To put people's minds at ease, I have a very strong support network around me and plenty of people to talk to. I appreciate everything. I will be okay. As with all things, I just need time. Thank you. My dad died of cirrhosis when I was 17. He was 45. He was, by all counts, a good father, caring, loved exposing us to wonderful art and hilarious comedies. But he drank a lot. About a year before he passed is when I noticed a change. Paranoid delusions. Talking to people not there. I'd come home from school to find Mormon missionaries that he had let in. Sometimes Jehovah's Witnesses. They were all taking advantage of him and he'd kick them out every time. He was a staunch atheist. Then the violence started. Burst into my room just to punch me in the face while I'm sleeping. He tried to light the apartment on fire twice. On my 17th birthday he called my so a cunt to her face and threw his drink at her. We ended up in fisticuffs again. He also just looked insane. Yellow skin, yellow eyes, super skinny. He couldn't walk, so he had 2 canes that he used violently. He died that year, the summer before my senior year of high school, leaving me homeless, but I was in the best place I could be. He was gone and never coming back. It's been 23 years, and I hate to think of the life I would have if he never died. Please click subscribe if you enjoyed this video.